in Reykjavik, fantastic city.
It is. It is. Thank you.
But I heard you don't live here in Reykjavik, so where do you live?
In Hveragerði. It's about 30 minutes east of Reykjavik, and most of the band lives there.
All right.
About half of the band is from there, and I spent roughly 10 years in Reykjavik, but ended up going back home.
Oh.
So yeah, we're most of us are back in Hveragerði. One is actually living abroad, but yeah, well, it's a tiny little town, 2,500 people, something like that, but not far from the city.
Very nice. So can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Hjalti Sveinsson, vocalist of Auðn, and what else do you want to know?
So can you please give us a short background?
So Auðn basically started, three of us from Auðn were just young kids from a small town who had nothing better to do than play video games, watch horror movies, and as we found out, play music. Alle, the guitarist, and Siggi, drummer, and me, not a musician. we got a place in Hveragerði where we could have some fun, and I was going to learn how to play the guitar. Ended up never doing it. Ended up with a microphone and a PA system, and somehow ended up being a vocalist. So yeah, we were writing songs together, and it wasn't really going anywhere. So I had a friend in Hafnarfjörður, here in the capital area of Reykjavik, and Andri, the other guitarist. He joined us when we rented a cabin kind of in the middle of nowhere. We were gonna, as I say, kind of dark throne it, just all go there for a cabin for a week, write music, record it as cheaply as possible, and just throw it out there. So a week later, Andri joins us kind of at the start. A week later, we have our first song, and probably all gained like 10 kilos from all the food we ate. Had food poisoning at one point, so it didn't quite go the way we meant for it to go, but that's where we wrote our first song. And later on, Hjalmar joined as bassist. And now he has moved over to guitars, and my nephew, it's my brother's son actually, Matthias. He joined us on bass before we started writing our last album, Vökudraumsins. And so it's just a bunch of friends from a small town writing music together.
And now you have 3 full-length albums later? Right?
Yes, that's
so
right.
So you released one in 2020, that was the latest one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what are you working on right now?
Fourth album. It's going a bit slow because we've had tremendous help from the town of Hveragerði, small town we're from, and they've been very good with providing us with housing. That ended recently, just due to the fact that there was pretty much no empty housing left in the town, and they tore it down for some new buildings, so we ended up getting a new place. We're currently turning it into something we can actually work with, so as soon as that's up and running, we'll continue writing the fourth album. So we're in a bit of a state of transition right now, but after COVID and everything, I think the timing is quite all right. Like, things have been a bit slow after COVID happened, so I think the timing is very good actually.
It feels like things are recovering, but still like healing a bit, like from COVID and that shock that you couldn't do anything. So how was the situation for you during COVID?
During COVID, I quite liked it.
Very cool.
I was employed in a job where I couldn't really work from home, so I didn't miss out any work due to COVID, unfortunately. But so for me, it was just, kind of daily life, but the masks added on top of it. Not much changed for me during that period. Of course, band was completely halted, kind of, because we wanted to follow up on the album and we couldn't. Had to cancel a tour and everything, which was a shame. But apart from that, like I said, I didn't hate having to isolate.
I know, I know
do,
the feeling.
I do quite a bit of it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
We were finishing the album when COVID kind of hit first. So when we were about to get going again, we kind of got the answer that, your album is already almost 3 years old. You need to be working on a new. Yeah, exactly. So I feel a bit peeved that we had a whole album and I think from all of our perspectives the best one yet, and we couldn't follow it up. So yeah, I mean it's a bit annoying, but there's nothing you can do. You just keep writing, and those songs will be in our set lists anyway. So. We are all otherwise employed. We have families and stuff, so we're not really aiming for the 11 months a year on the road whole package, although I think each and every one of us has wondered what that would be like. But ideally we do maybe 1, 2 or 3 week tour a year, maybe 2, and then try to plan them around some festival bookings. That's kind of like an ideal situation for us, to go to see festivals and plan some gigs around it.
So what genre would you say that your music is?
Well, the simplest answer is black metal. But if you really want to dive into it, it's a bit more complicated because we don't really sound like Mayhem, for instance. But I never understood the term atmospheric black metal, because what black metal is not atmospheric, but I do get it. So I think we're a combination of atmospheric black metal and a bit more of this second wave Norwegian black metal, if you wanna. Yeah. But we all kind of emphasize that a genre should not be in our minds when we write. That's how you end up with one song on our last album is more heavy metal than anything. So if we can do something with our own flavor to it, it doesn't have to be, strictly speaking, black metal. Or I kind of always like it when bands defy the genres a little bit. That being said, we're not really pushing any boundaries here. We kind of just write what comes to mind. So the labeling happens afterwards.
But Iceland is not a big of a country. You have 370,000 people somewhat here, yeah. But still you have a very large black metal scene. What do you think that is?
I think there's mainly 2 reasons. We have a lot of kids can very easily seek musical education. Iceland, or at least used to have, a very strong middle class. So whatever kids wanted to learn to play an instrument, they were encouraged to seek that at school. So we have a lot of young musicians here, and also just maybe because we're not that dissimilar from Norway in some ways. I heard who was it Blasphemer from Mayhem, the second incarnation of Mayhem, who said he wrote so much just doing walks around Oslo. I think it's similar here. We have long dark winters, and it inspires us in a way. The Icelandic nature inspires us a lot. We're kind of trying to do the same in our music. That it's something that is can be beautiful, but also very harsh at the same time. The nature here can be absolutely gorgeous, but at the same time, it can be very dangerous. And I back in the days, 100 years ago, it was just very, very common for people to get lost outside in bad weathers, never to come back. And this is just, we are constantly reminded of how small we are, in a way, by the Icelandic nature. So it's something that you have to respect, but you can also admire the beauty of it. I actually write only a small part of the lyrics so far. But Alli Aðalsteinn, the guitarist, he has written most of them. But I write some of them. We have one by our drummer, one by Andri, some by Ali's father actually. So like if a lyric is good, we'll work with it. But yeah, they come from all over kind of within the band.
And what are they mostly about, and what are they inspired about, obviously, Iceland?
Nature and depression, loss, perhaps the usual suspects in our genre. But yeah, they can. If you look closely, there's some anti-establishment rhetoric in there, along with. I wrote one about. There was a ugly case here in Iceland with where troublesome teenagers and kids were sent to places in the countryside where they were supposed to be toughened up, but they toughened up as they were treated very, 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 very badly, and most of them were just damaged for life because of it. So all of these kinds of stories kind of feed into this energy. So it can come from many places, but I think the predominant themes are, yes, nature, loss, depression. Personal tragedies are not a good thing, but using arts to work through them and express yourself is a very healthy way, I think, to deal with it. And we get our best work to come out. And I think for me, a lot of metal is like this, like in Satanism and other things, about the strength and not showing weakness. And I kind of like, even if my tastes are all over the place, I like when I was first getting into heavy music, I kind of liked what was happening in the 90s when becoming vulnerable in music was pretty much done for the first time in extreme music, or like metal at least. You know, you had those 90s bands that came in, and for a lot of people that was a terrible thing. A lot of people who still cling to the past, and that's fine. It's fine. Like I'm not gonna diss anyone's preferences here, but for me, I just think like sincerity is very important. That is very hard to hold back when you actually talk about something that is very personal and difficult to you. So like everyone, I think one of the good things about Auðn is that we're also different in the band. So we are bringing in different perspectives, different inspirations, and then the difficult part comes where we have to kind of make it all fit together. That's where most of the friction comes from. But when we manage to do that and work through that friction, that's when we feel like we have our best moments.
So, I mean, how do you feel about society and mankind? And yeah,
it's a big question.
Yeah, I know.
Let's see if I can give you something a bit more concise. I think there is good and bad everywhere. I think all humans have the capacity for compassion and doing beautiful things, but we all also have the capacity to do terrible things. It's just the situations we're in, and you can have sympathy for some people, sometimes you can't, and the worst sides of humanity, they're despicable, but they make for a great subject matter in this kind of music. I think our music would be even angrier if I was talking about my views on Icelandic politicians. So yeah, no, I think it's here like everywhere else. You have some amount of corruption, and I have a maybe more than healthy distrust of the government. We're of the generation that we were getting our right to vote around the time when everything collapsed here in Iceland.
2008.
Yes. So around that time, and a lot of people lost a lot. A lot of people around me and my family lost a lot. So I think I kind of my first political inclinations were that of distrust.
Yeah.
So I see things in a broader light nowadays. Like no matter who you are, where you're from, what your religion is, we all kind of share the same goals. We just want a better life for ourselves and our friends and our family and those around us. We don't trust each other. So people tend to, keep their circles closed. So I think like when things are going well in a society, you don't necessarily see all the shit that's hiding under the surface.
If we dig into a little bit more like ideologies around religion, I read that people here in Iceland are not religious. Is your look upon religion?
I think religion is unnecessary. I just think that you can believe what you want to believe, and that's fine with me. But as soon as you start getting into organized religion, I think that should be treated just like any other club, basically. It's a thing you believe in and you want to do and whatever. It should not receive any kind of funding from the government or anything. That's something that was made sense hundreds of years ago, maybe. But nowadays, I think the only reason the church is so big is because they're holding on to the status quo, and they're really, really desperately trying to, stay relevant. I just think when it comes to religion, it's a personal thing, I personally don't believe any deities myself, or not a religious person, but I don't mind people being religious. Just keep it to yourself, If you find someone who shares your views, perfect, But it shouldn't be any different from motorcycle club, whatever,
I read that you have some motorcycle clubs here in Iceland.
I have no idea why I mentioned motorcycle clubs. I have never ridden a motorcycle in my life.
What is Satanism to you?
I'm probably not qualified to comment on Satanism. There's going to be, if I try to comment on Satanism, there's someone who knows their stuff much better than me that's going to, what the hell is he saying?
No, I want to know your opinion. Don't care about what other people think. This is purely your...
What I like about what I have heard is that it focuses on the individual being the best version of themselves they can be. I think that's a good thing. I don't. If you were to translate that into a political opinion, I don't lean that far to the right. But just as if you compare it to the messages of religions, I can understand the appeal of that. We should all strive to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. But again, Satanism, it's an ism.
But what about occultism? Is that something you have come in contact with? Or?
Fantastic subject material for horror movies.
Yeah.
but that's where my interest in that kind of fades.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. I thought there was a lesson to be taken from what happened in the 90s in Norway, not to take these things too seriously. That ended very badly there in Norway, and I don't think it doesn't appeal to me when people take things so seriously. When I was a teenager, and those more controversial beliefs from louder characters appealed to me. That was more some of the 90s bands being commenting on society, the typical youth rebellion stuff. There was never, for me at least, never any ideology behind it. And also I think most of the lessons that religion, when you say why religion, why occultism, why Satanism, they try to defend it with it can be good because of this reason and that reason. You can take all of this good stuff and see the value in that but leave everything else behind. And I mean, that's pretty much the argument when people discuss the religion, but it does so much good, you know. But that's kind of avoiding the whole topic of, yeah, but can't you do all those good things without being a part of an institution that has hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of years of abuse on their record? Like, any other company couldn't just brush off the past like that. So why can they? I don't know. In Iceland, I don't really encounter religious people much. That could be because I just stay within certain circles, but
it's a common here to be like baptized, you know, like.
Yeah. It's the what do you say, Lutheran?
Yes.
Yes. So the whole idea behind that was, from the way I see it, was kind of like, okay, we'll do this Christian thing. We just don't want to go to church on Sundays.
Exactly, yeah.
So Icelanders, we like, yeah, you're baptized, and you of course don't remember that. It's not your choice. Then when you're, 13, 14, you get the confirmation. And I think, like, well, I don't think anyone has formed proper opinions on this matter at that age. If they have, they're probably not very educated opinions, just due to the young age. So some people do like a civilian confirmation, if that's the right term. But like, most kids just go through the church ceremony just so they can get their presents, like, as you know. It's a bit like Christmas, you know. It has some, in society, it has some roots in Christianity, but like, are you celebrating Jesus, or do you want to eat good food and share gifts with your friends and family? Nobody's doing that because of Christianity. It's just still around. So a fantastic PR campaign for the religions.
Yeah. I think Iceland is more known for, you know, country with strong mythology, fairy tales, mysterious creatures, you know, like lurking around. So, and of course, has a history of Vikings going back as early as the 800s. So is that something you feel connected to, or is it something that you know, like, reflect in your lyrics, or?
So you speak of creatures.
Yes.
We have featured some creatures in our stories, and some creatures are things you have seen in very similar shape or form in other religions, like the mare that is basically just like, because we didn't understand what sleep paralysis is at the time, so we invented this sleep demon, and that sleep demon exists in many different cultures, and often shares a lot of common traits, but is a little bit different for each culture. Like, we have played a little bit with that in our lyrics, but we are not really of that inclination, like that Viking thing. And now I'm speaking for myself, not on behalf of the band, but like, I don't relate to the Viking thing at all. And I find it a little strange that it has become this source of pride for Icelanders, because we're kind of taught that these were violent, pillaging rapists. And now we should be proud to be their descendants. Yeah. We can't go anywhere without, like, oh, you're from Iceland, you're Vikings. And we're like, well, yeah, I guess.
How is the metal scene here in Iceland, would you say? Because, I mean, it's, like we mentioned before, it's not a big country, but you have a big metal scene. So how would you say that the metal scene is here?
The metal scene in Iceland is like everything that is successful in Iceland. It's actually really small, but very big per capita.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's our favorite term, per capita.
Yeah.
That's how we, it's tiny in the global scale, but we're like, oh, per capita, it's actually very big, you know.
Yeah.
So same goes for the metal scene here. It is definitely a niche thing in the grand scheme of things. But starting and again, like my first introduction to the Icelandic metal scene is around 2006, 7, something like that. We had there was a venue that was supported by the city of Reykjavik, where bands had places to rehearse, practice, and write. And there was a little stage there they could play. That's where I saw probably the first 10 or 20 gigs I saw in Iceland.
What bands?
Shout out to Severed Crotch, Shrine. During that time it was Atrum, Helfro was recent. I was thinking Helsher and Diabolus. There were some bands here in Iceland. You went and saw them. I was starting to get into like extreme metal. And I would be listening to like metal bands that were actively touring, like Decapitated at the time, and then I'd go to these shows and I'd think like these guys could so well like easily tour Europe, play these festivals, like they're right up there.
Which year was this?
This was like 2006, 7, something like that. So I can't really speak about what happened before that, but that was around the time where I was getting into the Icelandic scene. And it was kind of like just this tightly knit group. And when we'd see them play, we would think like, man, why aren't these guys touring Europe or the world? You know, they're up there with internationally known bands. And that kind of made you think like, you know, why couldn't we do this? Like from Iceland, you used to think like, when I was a kid and someone said like, I'm going to be so good at football, I'm going to play in the Premier League. Like the attitude was kind of like, yeah, fucking right. So yeah, you're from Iceland.
Yeah.
Like, nobody cares.
But look at Iceland football now.
Well, it's not actually that dissimilar to what happened to the metal scene. It's just you know, an injection of youth coming in and going at it, you know, not holding back. And there was like that Hitlerin thing unfortunately died out. It's making a little bit of a comeback now thanks to a few very good people, but there's 2 or 3 bars here downtown Reykjavik that kind of host almost all of the metal and alternative gigs. Gaukurinn is probably the most famous known one. It's only like, what is it, like 350 capacity or something, so it's not big at all, but that's kind of where most of the shows are here in Iceland. You really have to put in a lot of effort and put together something special if you want to try and get a bigger room, because they are very expensive, and like for young bands, you don't really do that until you're like attracting bigger crowds. So like the scene is mostly situated in downtown Reykjavik, but yeah.
But is the interest big for, you know, like listening to bands, and when you have like a gig, or do you have any festivals like that? Do people come to Iceland for your music?
That's kind of like how it blew up a little bit here. It started with the way I see it, it started with Eistnaflug Festival, which started out as I think like 50 people going pretty much as far as they can from Reykjavik here in Iceland all the way east to Neskaupstaður. So this one guy was living there, Stefán Magnússon, and he took a bunch of guys with him. They had a very drunk weekend playing death metal there. And next year it was 100 people, then it was 200 people. A few years down the line, it's like nearing 1,000 people, I think. Unfortunately, that festival, I think it got a little too big for its own good. And then COVID happened, and we haven't seen it since. But that festival was like instrumental for a lot of the Icelandic bands. A lot of other festivals followed afterwards, like Oration, which turned into Ascension. That festival was very big for the Icelandic black metal scene in particular. But at Eistnaflug you had a lot of foreign media people and people who were working as promoters, journalists. That's thanks to a lot of people working with the Eistnaflug Festival. They invited people to come over and they come here and they see the like that Black Mass. Was it Black Mass, or am I thinking about the show? That parade thing that Mr. Mig and the Vanagandur guys did.
Oh, yeah.
They saw that there, and they were just like blown away with what was happening in such a tiny country, middle of nowhere. And that was like a huge boost. That's where we met most of our contacts that we are working with today, still. So it was really helpful to get some people from abroad to come over. Íslandflug deserves a lot of credit for actually doing that, bringing in the journalists and everyone that they brought in. Nowadays you have Norðanpunk and the Hellerin Metal Fest, a small thing here in Reykjavik. I don't know what's happening with Ascension, but it's been a staple here. And yeah, things are, we're kind of, I think everybody's trying to figure out a little bit how things look like after COVID.
Yeah. I read that you have a dating app here to check whether if you meet someone, you need to check the Icelandic book to see if you're related or not.
It's true, although, I don't think it was conceived as a dating thing.
Okay.
I think it's just Icelanders have been very good documenting everything. That's why we still have those 1,000-year-old scripts and everything. So we've always been very good with documenting everything, so we can trace our ancestry through generations, very far back. And I think there was around the turn of the millennium when an Icelandic company released basically public access to all these records. And anyone could go on their computer at home and look up the relation to anyone. And nobody thought about it in this light, but considering the fact that this can be a problem with so few people here, people have used it for the purpose of vetting each other, I guess. Yeah. I've never worried about it, but maybe if I sometime do it the morning after and find out I shouldn't have done it, maybe that will change.
You learned your lesson.
Yeah, but so far no troubles that I know of.
That's great. Thank you very much for joining us, and good luck with your musical career. Thank you, Hjalti.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.